Okay guys, I think we'll start. Welcome everyone, thanks for coming. I'm James Rucker, I'm one of the founders of the Maudsley Psychedelic Society. Very happy to present Leor, who's working in David Nutt's lab with Robin Carhart-Harris. He's going to give us a lecture on two aspects of neuroimaging and psychedelics, one on the eyes closed visuals and the other one on the reaction of the amygdala in the psilocybin for depression study. Is that right, Leor? Yeah. Okay. It's going to talk for about 45 minutes, then we'll have a sort of open-ended discussion after that, and then we'll go to the pub, which will be the Phoenix, I think, in Denmark Hill, because it's convenient and does good food and drink. And yeah, I'll hand over to Leor now, and thank you very much for coming, Leor.
So I'm I'm a PhD student of Robin Carhart-Harris and David Nutt for 3 years already working in the lab. And the talk will be split into two very different aspects. One is just the psychedelic imagery, the visuals, the eyes closed visuals, and the other one will be about changes from the psilocybin-assisted depression trial. Yeah. So psychedelic imagery, I'll focus on, again, the eyes closed imagery, what we see with psychedelics with eyes closed. It could be geometrical patterns, it could be more complex sceneries, it could be entities, and how this translates to changes in the brain. So in the introduction, I'll talk about, first of all, imagery, general imagery, not just psychedelics, and the relevancy of the alpha frequency changes. Then I'll show the results that we published 6 months ago based on fMRI and MEG data from the LSD trial, and then a more sophisticated analysis that we call retinotopic coordination. Probably all of you know that these are classic psychedelics, magic mushrooms, LSD, ayahuasca, and all of the active compounds of these psychedelics are serotonin 2A receptor agonist. So this is serotonin, and all of these psilocybin, LSD, and DMT, they're quite similar to the structure of serotonin, and they're agonists to the 2A receptor, and that's what defines them as classic psychedelics. The distribution of the 2A receptor is over here, and we can see that the distribution is kind of all over the brain, with maybe higher distribution in visual areas, subgenual areas, auditory areas, but it's quite widespread. Now, about the visual network, when we look at the world, we receive information from the eyes to the thalamus, to the LGN, an area within the thalamus, and then the LGN sends the information to the primary visual cortex, V1. V1 sends the information for parallel processing for the rest of the visual network, which is V2, V3, V4, etc. These are the main subregions of the visual cortex. Now, psychedelic imagery. I'm gonna first explain as I said before, psychedelic imagery is the eyes closed imagery. And when you have a debate, when you go usually to different conferences, Breaking Prevention or the Psychedelic Science Conference, in corridors you usually have a debate of this kind. Some would say that psychedelic imagery is imagery we see from the outside world, we receive information from God, collective subconscious, etc. And some would say that we look inside, so the eye is inverted over here, the Alex Gray painting, and we look at the subconscious, or we look at just noise that the brain generates, and we're not able to see it without the drug. This is another debate I'm going to talk about. I don't think right now there's any scientific tools to talk about this debate, and I'm going to talk about something more similar to the imagery debate. So the visual imagery debate is a debate about how the brain is processing imagination. If you're asked to close your eyes and imagine a cow or a dog, how the brain is processing this. And this is a debate that's already ongoing for probably 40 years. And on the Kosslin side, he claims that the visual areas in the brain are processing the imagination as regular vision. And Pilishin size claims that it's not true, and the visual cortex is not involved in the processing of imagination. Now, 40 years ago, most of people were at Pillish side, and things change, and now almost everybody are at Kostin side, that the visual cortex is processing imagination. So there was a paper last year just saying, ending the imagery debate, and there's enough data to say that the visual cortex is processing imagination, and there's some limitation to this, and some would claim that the imagery debate is still open. Now, there's a same thing with the REM debate for dreams, whether the primary visual cortex is processing dreams. And a study from 20 years ago shows that actually at REM sleep, the primary visual cortex over here in blue is deactivated. So it's not activated while we're having REM sleep. But another study from 10 years ago showed the opposite, that the primary visual cortex is activated at REM sleep, and this debate is still going on. So I'm giving those debates just to say that what I will call now the psychedelic imagery debate, whether the primary visual cortex is involved in processing the visual information, is not very obvious, because this debate is going on in other fields of imagery, like the sleep, like the dream imagery, and like imagination. So this is the psychedelic imagery debate, is just whether the primary visual cortex or the visual areas are processing the psychedelic information of eyes closed in a similar way to regular vision. And this, I think, we do have tools to answer. So the main message of the talk will be that to some extent the visual cortex is processing the eyes closed psychedelic imagery in a similar manner to eyes open regular vision. However, I will not answer whether the visual cortex is the source of this imagery, and I will not answer if the processing in the visual cortex, and specifically in the primary visual cortex, is necessary for the subjective experience. I'll just say that it is processing part of it. Now, one of the first descriptions of the psychedelic imagery from 1942, Kluver with mescaline, and he had patients given mescaline, and he described specific patterns that were reoccurring between different patients. So we said there are few patterns that the patients are likely to see, and there are few patterns that are not likely to see. In 1979, the Ermentrout and Powell, they published a very beautiful mathematical model that kind of explains these patterns based on the architecture of the brain. So there's a certain architecture called the retinotopic architecture in the brain that is actually a transformation between the world that we see to the material, to the different subregions of the brain. And Ermentrout and Powell, they just claim that if you go to the opposite, if you go from spontaneous activity in the brain, there are certain waves of spontaneous activity in the visual cortex, you'll have a subjective experience based on this architecture of the brain. And that was one of the first mathematical models that kind of showed that nicely. So I'm going to talk about the alpha frequency, because this is a very replicated result in lots of psychedelic studies. So first of all, alpha frequency you can measure with EEG and MEG, and alpha frequency is 8 to 13 hertz, which means 8 to 13 activations or cycles per second. And I'm going to show you first this result from 1966. And at the black line, this is without the LSD, and 8 to 13 hertz is this on the power spectrum. Okay, and we see that with LSD in two different time points, there's a decrease of the power of most frequency, which the most prominent decrease is for the alpha frequency. So this is a result that was replicated many times. In 2004, decreased alpha frequency for ayahuasca from the group from Barcelona, Jordi Riba. In 2013, Cometer, this is the group from Zurich, the Vollenweider group. They showed it with psilocybin, and they showed that they can block the alpha power decreases with ketanserin, which is a serotonin 2A receptor antagonist. Eduardo, some of you might know Eduardo, he was a while at Imperial, but this is a study he did in Brazil, and he showed that the decreased alpha power in the middle visual areas relate to the plasma levels of DMT. Okay, so these are the plasma levels of DMT, and there's a correlation between the decreased alpha power and the plasma levels. Another study from the group from Barcelona, ayahuasca decreased alpha power in occipital areas that is attenuated by blocking the 2A receptors, which also attenuates the psychedelic visual imagery. And this is actually my favorite one, and this is from 1960 from a Japanese group, and this is the only one that has a really nice within subject design, and they recorded EEG for 4 to 5 hours, and every 15 to 30 minutes they stopped. And they ask the subjects what is the intensity and the complexity of the visual experience. So they have for each subject a lot of time points with the intensity and the complexity, and they related this to the changes in alpha power. So this is probably the only study that has a within subject design. Now the explanation, I'm going to suggest a very easy and simple explanation. Decreased alpha power is what happens very obviously when you record EEG, when you move from eyes closed to eyes open. And when you're with eyes open and you increase the visual attention to your surrounding, or you have more details in what you look at, you have even more decrease in alpha power. So this is what you see with lots of studies, and even when it's very obvious when you record EEG, is that increased visual attention will lead to a decreased alpha power. Increased visual stimuli would lead to a decreased alpha power. So it's a very easy explanation to say that this is the case just with eyes closed. You have increased visual information with eyes closed, and that would just translate to decrease and relate to decreased alpha power. So if the intensity of this visual information is stronger, there's even a more decrease in alpha power.
Can you say what you mean by reduced alpha power? What does it look like?
Okay, so when you record the EEG signal, you can have a really nice, so let's go to the, okay. So this is like an alpha frequency. You see an alpha wave, it's very clear and it has a very clear amplitude. A decreased power means that it's not as clear as here. It might have less amplitude, or it might not be very structured like a nice wave.
Like it's just underneath. It's not structured,
yeah.
just above, but underneath.
Yeah, the underneath will be less power than this one.
Right. Okay. So it's a function of amplitude and regularity.
Yeah. Now, alpha power and bold, and this is a study that's been shown a few times, that there's anti-correlation between the fMRI signal, bold in this case, and the alpha power, the alpha frequency power. So when we have decreased alpha power in occipital areas, there's an increased bold, so increased activity. There's a nice relationship between the two. And that goes quite well with one of the first, this is the first fMRI study that discusses V1 and kind of the visual cortex activity. So this is by Draulio from 5 years ago, and he showed with ayahuasca that V1 is activated with eyes closed. So how he showed that is that the blue line is without the ayahuasca, and the subjects move from eyes open to eyes closed. And then you see this decrease in the bold activity in the primary visual cortex in V1. And when subjects were with ayahuasca, this is the red line, you don't see this decrease in activity when they move from eyes closed to eyes open. So the activity in V1 stayed constant even when they changed eyes closed and eyes open. So this shows quite well that there's probably some activity in V1. Now we showed it, now we decided to show it in different ways and kind of attack this question from different angles. And we used the LSD data for that. We had a balance order within subject placebo-controlled design, 20 subjects. We used 15 subjects for the analysis. 1 subject did not complete the study because of anxiety. 4 subjects had high levels of head movement and we had to remove them from the analysis. LSD was IV, 75 micrograms, or placebo. All the scans were eyes closed, resting state scans. So there were 2 ASL scans to measure cerebral blood flow, 2 fMRI scans to measure resting state functional connectivity, which I'll explain soon, and 2 MEG scans, which is quite similar to EEG in what it looks at. This is a retrospective scale of, it looks different. Okay, so it's a retrospective scale of the peak experience of the subjects from the LSD. So they actually rated it at the end after the come down of the drug, and you can see that there's quite strong elementary imagery and complex imagery when they describe retrospectively the peak experience of LSD. Now this is ratings from under the influence, so from the experience itself, and we can see that these are the fMRI scans, and simple hallucinations and complex hallucinations are here, and they're the highest at the fMRI scans, and then they're quite low at the MEG, but they're still significant, so it's not completely come down. But it's more than an hour apart, the MEG and the fMRI. So with the MEG, the first thing we saw, and that relates to all of the studies I showed you before, is that there's decreased alpha power in occipital areas, and this correlates with the intensity ratings of visual hallucinations. So this makes sense. Now, other results, we see increased blood flow at the primary visual areas over here. So that's kind of a new result. And this increased blood flow in visual areas correlate with the subjective ratings of visual hallucinations, so with the subjective experience. And it's really hard to see lines over here. There's a line. And they correlate nicely with a decreased alpha power. So that means that there's a relationship. That means that there's a relationship between the increased cerebral blood flow that we see and decreased alpha power, and kind of this the cerebral blood flow changes has a neural component into it. Resting state functional connectivity. So, just a quick explanation. A quick explanation about what is resting state functional connectivity. When you look at fMRI, you have a bold scan. This scan is 8 minutes. You have a volume every 2 seconds. This is a TR, which means you'll have a time course of activity. So you can take an area of interest, the region of interest, and plot the bold time course of this area. Now you can look at other areas and plot the time course of this area's activity and see how they relate, how they correlate with each other. And this just means functional connectivity. So how different areas in the brain, if they move together, or anti-correlated if they move not together, or they can just be random, and then it's zero resting state functional connectivity.
You're looking how well the lines match up.
What's that?
You're looking how well the lines match up.
So with the primary visual cortex under placebo, we choose V1 as the seed, as the region of interest, and we see which other parts of the brain are connected to the visual cortex. So under placebo, we see that it's mainly other visual areas, so the occipital pole. But under LSD, we see this result, and it was published in many newspapers, that there's an increase of functional connectivity between the primary visual cortex and many other parts of the brain. So angular gyrus, insula, caudate, BMPFC, and ACC, the thalamus. So there's just a wide increase of functional connectivity between the primary visual cortex and the rest of the brain. Now this was the way it would work. So this is quite a big result, and it's like usually results like this, sometimes they're just artifacts, or there's a confound, or there's a problem. And we tried in many ways to change the pre-processing pipelines, change stuff in how we analyze the data, but this result was quite strong. Now, it's beautifully correlated with the intensity ratings of the subjects. So as subjects had a stronger functional connectivity, they also had, between the visual cortex and these regions, they also had a stronger subjective visual experience with eyes closed. This is a nice correlation, and even a nicer correlation is between the functional connectivity and the decreased alpha power. So this is quite a strong correlation. So increased functional connectivity relates to decreased alpha power. That's clear? Yeah. So yeah, this was kind of in many news, and I'm just gonna show a few examples. Nature described this as under the influence of LSD, the brain's visual cortex has increased connectivity with other brain regions on the right than when imaged under placebo on the left. This is the accurate description. Guardian. The image shows different sections of the brain, either on placebo or under the influence of LSD. Lots of orange, which is also an accurate description, but it's meaningless. And this was the most problematic one. There are actually a lot of these. So this is from the Telegraph. The image on the right shows how active the brain is when taking LSD. And there are lots of this. Some say there's under LSD you see increased activity, and kind of different ways to say this. And this is wrong because, as I said, we're not talking about activity. This orange is not the brain becomes more activated. It just becomes more connected to the visual cortex, and it's quite a big difference. So from these things, a lot of people, after we published it, they kind of send us email with like big theories about what does it mean, this increased activity, and it's just a shame that they actually don't go and read the paper itself before developing a theory. But don't trust the news. We know that. Okay. Limitations of the study. There was higher levels of head movement under LSD. This is a problem with all fMRI studies, that there's one condition with higher levels of head movement. We did quite a lot in the pre-processing and some quality control measurements, but there's still more movement, and the only way to solve this in future studies is to train subjects. Which is actually something we're considering, but yeah. Or have like a very like in the ayahuasca study, because that I showed before, the subjects were drinking in Santo Daime every week, so they kind of like they know the space, so they're quite good at being stable. And then also Johns Hopkins, they're running a study right now of psilocybin with meditators, and probably that's a population that moves less because they know how to be still. fMRI and MEG were not simultaneous; they were more than an hour apart. Our future DMT study will be EEG and fMRI combined. We tried to replicate this with our old psilocybin data. We didn't manage to replicate it as strong as under LSD, and this is quite a big limitation. It's still there, the result, but it's not strong under LSD. And before jumping to big conclusions, this result should probably be replicated a few times. I'm talking about the functional connectivity result.
How is it different from the psilocybin?
It's I try to look at the same kind of choosing the visual cortex a bit in a different way, because in the LSD I had a localizer for each subject, so I had a task that localized the visual cortex for each subject. So it was a very accurate localization. And for the psilocybin I used a mask, like just from an atlas. So it's less accurate, the localization.
So you're talking about the way you choose to see it.
Yeah, but still, even though I chose the seed like less accurately for the psilocybin because we did not have this localizer, but still we didn't see this strong result. I'm just saying that whenever there's a fMRI study, it needs to be replicated a few times. And with psilocybin data that we have, it's almost a strong result, but it's not as strong as the LSD. It's not as kind of like widespread. So the future DMT study might show us more details, and I'm actually also getting some of the ayahuasca data from the Brazilian group also to try to replicate this result. And this is also a problem of psychedelic studies with that. I think it's a problem we need to start measuring, is that maybe under the influence of LSD they opened their eyes by mistake because they were a bit disoriented and they for a moment forget the situation and they just open their eyes. And if I'm saying that LSD behaves as if the eyes are closed, as if the eyes are open, we need to measure this as a compound, whether they actually by mistake open the eyes. So by recording or by asking them. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a more specific kind of focused analysis now on the visual cortex. I said the visual cortex is divided to different subregions, and when you show videos like this to subjects, these are called retinotopic videos. This is a polar angle video. You can look at the activity at the fMRI at each subregion of the visual cortex. So when you show something like this, the 360 degrees, each subregion will have a representation of this whole field of view. So V1 will have a whole representation of this, V2 a whole representation, etc. This is from a different study, but you can see here, this is the location of the wedge in space. It's not smooth enough. And this is the corresponding activity in the brain to the polar angle. So we can see different waves of spreads of activity. That's because there are different subregions in the visual cortex that each one of them have a representation of the wedge in space. Is that clear?
So that's the bit of the brain that lines up.
Yeah, that's the bit of the brain that lines up correspondingly to the location of the wedge.
Why did you go around?
Because we're just looking right now at the right hemisphere, and this is the left field of view. So, and then we showed our subjects a simplified version of this retinotopic mapping. We actually showed it under placebo and under LSD. We didn't use the LSD data. It was a bit too noisy. I think it was a bit harder for them to focus on the dot. So the data was a bit noisier. Yeah. So what we did from the data of the placebo is identify different patches and subregions of the visual cortex. So V1, the primary visual cortex, has a subregion that corresponds to the vertical field of view. And V1 also have an area that corresponds to the horizontal field of view. And by doing this, you can map the vertical and horizontal patches of each subregion in the visual cortex.
So you're showing these people this when they're in the scanner
Yeah.
on LSD?
Yeah. On LSD, but actually the data that we use is only the placebo. And it was used just to localize areas of, like, the different areas, the different subregions. What's that?
This is to find your seed region.
Yeah, it's to define seed regions. So you can define a seed that is only about the vertical and a seed that is only horizontal. Okay?
And they've got to stare at the dot and not focus on the faces.
Yeah, they have to stare at the dot. Yeah. So we identified a seed that is a region of interest that is V1 horizontal and V1 vertical, and we identified V3 horizontal and V3 vertical. This is for each, we did it for each subject. And then we can go to the eyes closed resting state functional connectivity and see how the functional connectivity relates to this retinotopic representation. So,
Can I just ask you a question here?
Yeah.
So when you show them that stuff and you tell them to look at the
Yeah.
centre,
Yeah.
and you've got all this distracting stuff going on
Yeah.
either side. Presumably they get distracted by it at some point, and they sort of put their eyes to look at
maybe under LSD, yeah. Maybe under LSD it's not the right thing to do. But why you do them? Because you increase your signal. When you increase attention, you increase bold. So when you change like the old retinotopic stimuli were just like black and white. But now they're colorful with lots of things, and you increase attention by this.
maintaining their attention.
Yeah, you maintain attention and you make the stimuli stronger in a way, and that's why it's easier to have, like, you can make the stimuli shorter by increasing other factors of the stimuli. So if you need to, like, 40 minutes once to do this with a black and white, now if you do 10 minutes, you get the same thing because it's stronger. So I said we identified those patches for V3 vertical horizontal, V1 vertical horizontal, and now we looked at functional connectivity of eyes closed. So the identification was based in the video, but now we looked at the eyes closed activity. And the hypothesis was that under placebo, the difference between the green connectivities and the purple ones would be zero, because when you close your eyes under placebo, you don't see anything in space. There's nothing that's located in space. But under LSD, when you close your eyes, you have a certain visual input that's also in space, although the eyes are closed. And therefore, the functional connectivity would be based on the retinotopic architecture. Okay, so the green will be more than the. Is that clear, the hypothesis? Yeah, okay. So yeah, the result was exactly this. So under placebo, the measure we called the phenotypic coordination was 0, and under LSD it was stronger. And we used 10 subjects for this analysis. We had to remove few of them because we didn't have a clear phenotypic representation of their V1 and V3. But for the 10 that we used, 9 out of the 10 had increased retinotopic coordination, which means that when they close their eyes, the brain behaves as if there is a visual stimuli that's located in space. Okay? Because the functional connectivity between V1 and V3 becomes dependent on the retinotopic architecture. Okay. Limitations, this did not correlate with the subjective ratings of intensity. I believe that one of the reasons that this is the case is that intensity is not the only thing that relates to the location in space of the visual experience. So you can have a very strong visual experience, but it's all encompassing, it's just everywhere. But you can have maybe a weak visual experience, but it's more clearly located in space. So a better measurement will actually try to have how strong was your experience located in different parts of the visual field. So that's actually quite complicated to measure. It was a small sample size. We did not have analysis of regular vision to compare, so maybe another condition of the subjects watching the video would be a nice condition in order to make the claim that the visual cortex behaves as if it's just having a kind of a regular vision experience. And maybe the subjects under placebo were more tired, and this is actually a limitation of probably most psychedelic studies. The fMRI can be quite a tiring place, and maybe under placebo they fall asleep or just kind of doze off. In summary, we see increased functional connectivity from V1 to many other regions. We see increased cerebral blood flow in the primary visual cortex, decreased alpha power in visual areas. All of these results relate to each other, and they relate to the subjective ratings. And we see changes of functional connectivity based on the retinotopic organization of the visual cortex. That's clear? So what we're going to do with this in the future, this is a study we kind of already started to do. We didn't start at scanning, but it will happen soon, maybe in a few months. So we collaborate with Gallant Lab. They're from Berkeley, California. And they showed a few years ago, unrelated to psychedelics, they showed that they can reconstruct the visual experience of their subjects. So they show their subjects a few hours of YouTube video and record the brain activity from the primary visual cortex. So the subjects are lying in the MRI. And then the algorithm learns how the visual cortex is processing this YouTube information. Now they have a trained algorithm. They show their subjects a new video that the subject didn't see before, and they try to predict the video based on the brain activity. So this is a reconstruction. So on the left, you can see the video that they presented to the subjects, and on the right, the reconstruction based on the brain activity. And you see it's not the most accurate, but there's some obvious similarities between the two. And yeah, they just show that this is possible. So what we're going to try to do, and based on the idea that the primary visual cortex is processing the eyes closed visual experience, we're going to try to train this algorithm like they did based on just YouTube videos. Maybe we'll modify those YouTube videos, but then instead of reconstructing another video, try to reconstruct the eyes closed psychedelic experience. So try to make a video of what we see with eyes closed under LSD or under DMT. Yeah. And that's kind of a crazy idea, but fun. Yeah. We're not sure it's going to work. Yeah.
How do you make algorithms when this connectivity is so good? The algorithm that you base, for instance, like this, the neural architecture presumably is quite similar when you're watching the videos that the algorithm is derived from and the secondary videos from which this is derived from.
Yeah.
When you get in with LSD, suddenly you've got all this connectivity with other brain regions.
This is only based on So in this case, it's only based on V1. V1 is like a very raw information. It's like you don't really go to higher levels. You just go to the most raw kind of almost pixelated, not really pixelated, but it's look the most raw information. So you don't really look higher than V1. So it doesn't really matter. Clear? Okay. Yeah, that's gonna be fun.
Does anyone have any questions about it?
You want a question about this part?
I just wondered if it's worth having a sort of brief discussion about that and then moving on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I did my bachelor thesis on figure-induced
Uh-huh.
elementary
Yeah.
hallucinations
Yeah.
and people. Don't you think the closed-eye LSD visuals will be too fine resolution and move too quickly for you to make out much substance using a method with as crude time and space resolution as fMRI?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to be huge wheels moving extremely slowly. It's going to be lots of tiny stuff going on.
Yeah, you're right. That's a problem, and we might gonna record, even if we record faster, like right now the TR of fMRI is usually 2 seconds, and that's very slow for the psychedelic experience. Even the fastest you can record is maybe 0.7 seconds, still slow. And you're right, but
What do they use for that?
for this they used a 1 second
It's fMRI, is it?
in fMRI. I do still believe that they're kind of also, you're right, a lot of things are happening fast, but some of the things are happening slow, and maybe we're going to capture this. Yeah. So not necessarily like very complicated kind of geometrical changes, but maybe there's some slower processes that we might catch.
If you improve the training of the algorithm as well, does that have any?
Yeah, if you have a longer training, so right now this is like 3 or 4 hours training. If you do a longer training, this would look nicer. So, and we're planning to do so all of the training in their study was based on kind of natural videos, so things that are just happening, but we're going to use also like more psychedelic videos because the training affects the reconstruction. So maybe to use some stuff that are more like electric sheep videos or more just geometrical patterns.
But then is there kind of bias in what you introduce into the training?
We're going to use all and then see what happens when you just use natural ones, see when you use But the thing is that the images it reconstructs, it's actually not reconstructing them from a training, it's reconstructing them from like a different other database. It's quite complicated. We'll not go into it right now. Yeah.
So how would you actually train the algorithm? Because under the influence of psychedelics, you don't know what the person's seeing. They're not necessarily seeing the thing you're presenting to them. And this algorithm presumably assumes that they're seeing the video you're showing them. Right?
Yeah. So the training will be based on videos. So this is the hypothesis that the visual cortex is processing the psychedelic information as regular vision. If that's true, you can train the algorithm based on videos and then try to reconstruct the eyes closed experience. So the whole training would be not under LSD, it would be without any drug.
Okay, but I mean the brain might act quite differently.
Might, yeah.
So,
right, yeah. Definitely, it's a risky project. There might not work.
Yeah.
The brain might act differently. Still worth a try.
Yeah.
Was each algorithm just based on one patient? You use all the same patient?
You need to train it on each patient. You need to train it.
Between patients?
No, it doesn't really work for between patients.
But it's cool because you do get to ask the patient what you see.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to try to, in order to validate that it will be, that's a problem, and we kind of have a lot of thinking about it. How do we know that the reconstructed video relates to subjective experience? So you can do it for each subject, let's say a few times, and then you have for each subject 10 descriptions, and then you have 10 reconstructions, and you shuffle them. And then you ask the subject to connect the descriptions to reconstruction, and then you see that it relates to this experience. Another way is to introduce music while they're lying in the scanner under the drug, and then you also shuffle. You do a few music tracks, you get a few reconstructions, and then you ask the subject to connect which video he saw under which music. And hopefully the music will also affect the visual experience.
This is 2011. Has the technology improved since then? Have they got better at
They moved, yeah, the technology a bit improved, but they moved to do more semantic stuff. So maybe some of you saw, like, they published a Nature paper maybe 5 months ago with like this, a lot of like semantic areas and all over the brain. So they kind of moved away from visual stuff into semantic stuff. But they have better algorithms right now. But the focus of the lab moved a bit. Yeah. So the next part of the talk, psilocybin-assisted therapy and changes in amygdala recorded in the fMRI. So psilocybin-assisted therapy, quick explanation, maybe a lot of you know, but this is a picture from the Johns Hopkins team, and we can see here a few important aspects. We can see the guides, we can see the eye shades, so it means it's a very introspective experience, and the music, which is like the hidden guide of this experience, and it's actually a very directive guide. So the music is an important part. So this is the setting of the psilocybin-assisted therapy, and we have quite a similar setting in our study. 2 guides, eye shades, music. Before this, there's a preparation session. And in the preparation, it is suggested that the subject will have a very introspective experience and to accept whatever comes. So there's kind of like a guidance of saying, of letting go to the experience, of not resisting different things. So accepting also difficult parts of the experience, like fear, like anger, like sadness, and not resisting these emotions. And this is maybe a basic kind of guiding principle through all of psilocybin-assisted therapy. So not just our group, but almost all of the groups, this is the main component. After the session, there's also an integration session of trying to discuss with the guides kind of what's the experience, what's the meaning to get out of it. So this is the psilocybin-assisted therapy. It's not just the session, it's also the preparation, also the integration, and the setting of the experience. This is our therapy room, which of course was modified to something nicer. And so this is the therapy room with some music. So there's the music in the room and also with headphones. So the guys also listen to the music. Eye shades, some fake candles, and fake flowers, because you're not allowed to put real flowers in the hospital. But it's a much more cozy, nice environment. So the psilocybin-assisted therapy, the trial that we published 12 data from 12 subjects, but now we have already 20 subjects. This was an open-label feasibility study. All of the patients were treatment-resistant major depression, which means that they tried 2 different antidepressants. It didn't work for them, and then they came out for the trial. They had to taper off the antidepressants 2 weeks before the trial. The trial was with 2 doses of psilocybin, 10 milligram and 25 milligrams, separated by 1 week. The 10 milligrams was more like an introductory dose, but the real dose was the high dose was the 25 milligrams. We recorded fMRI at baseline before the low dose, before the 10 milligrams, and we recorded 1 day after the high dose. So the 1 day after means that it's not exactly a long-term recording of the fMRI, it's more like an afterglow measurement. And this is the clinical outcome of lots of details here. So in black is the mean QIDS score. So this is a score of depression. You can see the mean here at baseline and the reduction. All of these colors are the different subjects. And in red is the effect size, the COND. So here, this is the 5 weeks, and this is already 3 months and 6 months. And the effect size in 5 weeks is still quite high, so this is higher than most of antidepressant studies. Now, the effect size at 3 and 6 months is quite comparable to other antidepressant studies. but I just want to remind you that these are treatment resistant. So this is quite a difficult population. And this is just after, 1.5 doses. So, yeah. Another thing is there's another way of measuring this, which is by separating the group to responders and non-responders. And a responder means 50% reduction in the depression scores. And 6 months after the therapy, we had 9 responders out of the 19 completers of the study. So almost half of the patients were considered responders half a year after the trial. Now, we used a paradigm that's quite common in the studies of SSRIs, of antidepressants, and this is the changes in amygdala. So when you show subjects healthy or clinically depressed, when you show them fearful faces, you have activation of the amygdala. That's quite known. Actually, when you also show them happy faces or even neutral faces, you have activation of the amygdala. So it's not just for negative emotions, the amygdala activation. A depressed population, we see that the amygdala becomes hyperactive to negative emotions. So when you'll show fearful face to somebody who's considered clinically depressed, you'll have a very high activity of the amygdala. Now, the SSRIs, and this is a very replicated result, SSRIs reduce the activity to amygdala to negative emotions. It's not really clear what they do for happy emotions, and they're mixed results. But for negative emotions, they reduce the amygdala activity. This is a meta-analysis of antidepressant studies, and you can see here that maybe the clearer reduction for negative emotions is in the amygdala. So we use a similar paradigm in order to compare psilocybin-assisted therapy to SSRIs, to more conventional ways to treat depression. So it's quite a simple experiment. So you can show fearful, happy, and neutral faces to the subjects. All of them are passively viewing those faces, and we record the fMRI at baseline and 1 day after the therapy, the afterglow effect. Okay, so we have a very beautiful result from this analysis, and it's quite controversial result, and it's beautiful because it's controversial. And this is the increases in activity in the right amygdala. So we see that there are increases to fearful faces, to happy faces, to neutral faces, and to the fearful compared to neutral contrast. So this is kind of the gold standard of what you want to look when you do this type of experiments. So not just comparing to baseline or to an empty screen, and also comparing fearful to neutral faces. And we see increase in activity of the amygdala. This is controversial because it's the opposite from SSRIs. Okay, so now does this relate to the clinical outcome? And we see here that it's a relationship to the clinical outcome 1 week after the therapy. So you can split the group to ones who are considered remitters, and remission means that they're not clinically depressed anymore. The Beck depression scores are lower or equal 9. And you can split the group to remitters and non-remitters. The non-remitters are the ones who are still considered clinically depressed. So 11 remitters 1 week after the trial, and 8 non-remitters. And we see that this contrast of fearful compared to neutral, there's an area in the amygdala that is stronger for the ones who are not depressed, for the remitters. So there's a relationship between this increased amygdala activation and the clinical outcome.
So the amygdala is more reactive in people who remit.
Yeah. So how do we explain what's the hypothesis for this difference? As I said, antidepressants decrease amygdala reactivity to fearful faces, and there are mixed results regarding happy faces. So sometimes they decrease, sometimes they increase. With the one study we did with the psychedelic assisted therapy, we see increases to fearful faces and to happy faces 1 day after the therapy, the afterglow. Now we believe that these differences relate to the different strategy of the therapy, and this is quite intuitive to almost everybody who works with psychedelic assisted therapy. So antidepressants, that strategy is to relieve negative emotions, and this is also the main criticism for antidepressants. So an emotional blunting, so just pushing away kind of the bad things. However, psychedelic assisted therapy, as I mentioned before, the subjects are kind of directed to be open to all the emotional spectrum, so to accept difficult experience, to accept fear, to accept anger, to accept sadness, and kind of an in and through, to kind of experience it, and go through these emotions. So this emotional openness is an important part of the psychedelic therapy, and this might relate to the differences in amygdala that we see. So increased amygdala relates to increased emotional responsivity, and this is what the subjects are still experiencing one day after the therapy. Is that clear? Yeah.
What about the contrast between happy and neutral faces
So,
on mushrooms?
yeah, it was not as significant as, so it did not survive a certain cluster correction, but it's there, but it's not as significant. So I just want to sidetrack a bit from this main result into a different study with psilocybin, because some people will raise this up. And there's a different study with psilocybin from the Vollenweider group in Zurich, that they showed that the acute effects for healthy volunteers are decreases in the right amygdala activity to fearful faces. However, although the paper, kind of the title is decrease for fearful faces, they also saw, it's not faces, it's a negative stimuli. So in this case, these are not faces, these are scenes. Although in the title, the emphasis is on the negative, they also show this decrease to neutral faces, and they did not show this decrease to this contrast of fearful and neutral. This is a very problematic thing that a lot of psychedelic studies that do tasks are experiencing, which is probably just decreased attention. And decreased attention can explain a lot of results that are decreased anything that's related to task. So you can actually see also in the same study that they had to react to the stimuli, and we see increased reaction times under psilocybin. Increased reaction times probably mean decreased attention, and that's very much related to decreased bold, because bold signal is very much dependent on the amount of attention to the stimuli. So this is kind of just saying that this study does not really relate to our result, but I also will want to provide a different explanation, that the setting of this study is for healthy volunteers, and the setting is not promoting emotional openness, compared to the therapy setting that is promoting emotional openness. So these are completely different things, and our results should stay in the idea of psilocybin assisted therapy, and not just psilocybin, because these are different things. There's a certain direction to emotional openness when you put it in the therapy frame.
In your study, people on the antidepressant arm, did they have the same experience with therapy and listening to music about therapy?
We did not have an antidepressant arm.
Oh, sorry, that's comparing to other things.
Just comparing to the literature.
To the literature.
Yeah.
Why not there?
What's that?
Is it just not significant enough?
In the left? It's difficult to so also the antidepressant studies, sometimes they show right, sometimes they show left. There's no clear explanation. Some would say that there's a few papers that claim that right amygdala is more, it's also subconscious. So you can show like a subconscious stimuli. So you show an emotional face that you don't really perceive. It doesn't go to perception, but it still activates the amygdala. Okay, so in that case, you'll activate mainly right amygdala. So it's like kind of like more subconscious or subperceptual responses, and the left might relate to kind of higher level.
Why not just consider them together?
What's that?
Why not just consider them together?
Because if you sometimes average them together, I mean, they're different. There's something different, but there's no clear explanation of this difference. So all of the studies are separating them, because if you'll take a mean of both of them together, and you'll have something that's only on the right and not on the left, you'll not see it because you'll average it out.
Did you look at reaction times in your study as well?
No, because in our study they were just passively viewing. They're not reacting to the stimuli. They were just looking at the stimuli.
Because the difference is also that that study is comparing placebo to being acutely intoxicated while your participants
Exactly.
are free of both.
Yeah, but still, in our study, maybe you can see maybe an increased attention. So maybe they feel better, they're more comfortable with the MRI environment, and maybe there's an increased attention to the stimuli, which means increased results.
When were to set the post-step?
1 day after the session, the second session in the morning. So, yeah.
That's 1 day after the high dose.
1 day after the high dose. Yeah.
What do you mean by psilocybin assisted therapy? Is it just the fact that the mood is nicer and it's more
Yeah.
appropriate maybe for them, or is there any psychological help before to try to ask them to, I don't know, open up their emotions? Or
Yeah.
can you explain a little bit more
Sure.
what you mean by
Sure.
that?
So yeah, James was also one of the guides, and he can also explain. But so tell if you want to add something to what I'm going to say. Feel free. So yeah, there is a certain direction of the guide. So during the session, the guides are just there. They're taking kind of an unjudgmental way of just being there and supporting whatever comes to the subjects, and quite empathetical also. But trying to support and kind of induce an introspective experience. But in the preparation, there's an emphasis of letting go and maybe setting an intention of what you want to work on, what you want to heal. So the intention is important, and I think the intention and the rapport, how the connection you build with the guides is important for the preparation. And the integration, which means after the session, the kind of the meaning you get out of it, maybe some conclusions, maybe stuff you want to change in your life. These are all part of the therapy. But during the session itself, it's mainly the music, and the guides who are just supporting the experience. But these are all important factors, and they're quite important, and there are ways to make them stronger, quite in order to allow openness in the subjects. What you want is to allow a certain non-resistant experience of the subjects, and the whole therapy is around this. Yeah. You want to add something to?
It's really hard to define before what psychological support is going to be like in a psychedelic session, because people's reactions to psychedelics are so different. So to that extent, it has to be very flexible. But you don't find yourself getting into deep and meaningful conversations with people at the time, because generally speaking, well, it can affect their ability to verbalise things, and also because we encourage them to sort of go into the experience and listen to the music, and then we talk about stuff afterwards. So really, it's about supporting them through whatever happens, but since we can't predict what's going to happen, there's no set, this is what we will and will not do. But it's very sort of empathic and making them feel, setting the right context for them to go through whatever experience they're going through.
So I'm going to go back to the increased openness that might relate to this increased amygdala activity, and go show 2 different things that relates to that. So Mendel, he designed the music playlist for the study, and he studies music and the relationship to, in this case, to the psilocybin assisted therapy. And they made interviews of all of the patients 1 week after the session, and the interviews were about the music. And then these interviews were given to 3 different judges, and the judges rated the amount of resistance compared to openness to the music. So on this side, this is more resistant to the music experience, not allowing it to kind of do certain processes, and this is an openness to the experience, so more letting go to the music. So resistance, sometimes subjects can get quite angry if they don't like the music, they can want to change it, and it's kind of sometimes the music is blocking them, or they're just blocked to be open to the music. And we can see here that this resistance and openness relates to the reduction in depression scores 1 week after the therapy, and this is a strong correlation. So subjects who were more open to the music had a better clinical outcome.
What type of music?
So yeah, it's Mendel is doing a lot. There's a lot of ambient in it, and usually there's a certain kind of pattern to the music. So you start quite easy. There's an emotional peak somewhere to have a certain kind of emotional steering, and there it goes down.
That he used.
What's that?
On YouTube, there's an article that talks about the study.
Uh-huh.
There's like 2 or 3 of the songs that he used,
Yeah.
and pretty long, 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Kind of chill out music. Yeah, it's a crescendo, so it tends to get more intense by the end.
Yeah.
It's meant to mimic the phases of the drug experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So the idea is a bit to mirror it. So in the beginning, it is there to relax. So the come up can have quite a lot of anxiety. So maybe in the come up you want something more relaxed. But ever when you kind of reach the plateau of the drug, you might want something that steers you up a bit.
What is the advantage of using a predetermined playlist rather than the subject's favorite music?
The subjects don't really know their psychedelic space. So you want music without lyrics because the lyrics are very directive. And I think for people who are not experienced with psychedelics, it's really hard to know what music they'll like under the influence. Yeah. But we open to the idea that sometimes maybe subjects in the future would say a few different kind of songs that they really like, and maybe in different parts of the session you can introduce this. But mainly the playlist should be kind of decided by the guides or Mendel in this case. Yeah.
It's also you actually be a constant between people.
Yeah. Yeah, but we are open to more individualized stuff in the future. Yeah.
Does this spark up to be a bit of concern that the people who are more open to the music are the ones who are also more open and want the treatment to work? So there's a bit of subjective.
Sure.
For me, initially it raises a lot of alarm bells that these are patients who want to get better and they want this treatment to work. So
maybe
they give better response to it.
Maybe. I mean, yeah, it's hard to say what's the reason. Maybe some subjects really hate ambient music, and then there's a resistance. Really, really hate. It's like kind of like, but maybe some subjects are just maybe go through. Maybe they don't like the guides. That's it. They don't have a good connection with the guides. They're a bit angry. Something was a bit annoying in the morning with the experiment. They just have a certain resistance which transforms into the music, or they're less open for change, and they're less kind of open for they less want to change things and less change their depression.
I was more saying the people at the top right there, the ones who've already decided they're going to get better after this treatment.
Maybe.
Not the hardest.
No, maybe, but this is an important thing, and this is an important factor of the treatment itself. How willing are you to let it go? It's not just deciding to get better is not you don't just decide to get better, but it is an important factor for every therapy is the decision to get better. This is the first thing you need to do. If you don't have it, you're right. You'll probably be more resistant to the therapy.
These were first time users, or
half of them had no experience, and the rest did have some experience.
History, but a lot of it long time ago.
I mean, you're right, because they're generally self-referrals as well, so they're all looking for something. And to that extent, you can say they're going to get better, but then for any treatment that you prescribe in psychiatry, the people who want to get better are generally the ones who can do better.
Grammatically, it's nice to get some supporting depression.
What's that?
Oh yeah, pragmatically they're reporting better depression. Well, the less depression again,
The mechanism is with psychedelics. The mechanism is always complicated, and there's a lot of like how you influence the experience, a lot of like placebo response within the experience, and it's kind of like almost a mixture of things that are really hard for science to deal, but they're getting better at the end of it.
How long was the whole day, the whole session, like the prep, the actual experience, and then the post-talk?
They came about 9:30, they gave them the drug at 10:30, and they
Yeah.
That's always a problem with people who come into research studies get a lot of attention. That is in itself.
Yeah.
Are they sat there by themselves in the room alone?
No,
No,
Or
they-
someone else
people
all the time?
all the time. But that was dictated by the ethic committee.
So it's not part of the treatment.
It is part. You have guys in the room.
Someone's looked after.
It's very important to be not just to look after you. There's also very personal things that happen, I think, with the guides, which is important for the therapy. And because you're very vulnerable and you have somebody there that kind of experience your vulnerability at the same time, you kind of not just open up to only yourself and nobody saw it. You actually have somebody experiencing it. I think it's an important factor of the well-being and the outcome.
It's not the psychedelics being therapeutic in and of themselves.
Mm.
It's the combination.
Yeah.
It's the psychedelic plus concepts.
So the guys that had experience with psychedelics in the past,
Yeah.
had they previously reported any benefit from that?
Not really. I mean,
It's obviously difficult to know if it was a long time ago.
Yeah, I don't really know the results, and I didn't look into it, so I'm just assuming. But a lot. What's that?
It's so difficult to measure.
Yeah.
They might not have had the
I mean, people who are using it recreationally, there probably some of it have a certain benefit, especially if their environment allows openness. So if you're in an environment with friends that knows these things and know this situation and allows you to experience different emotions, then it might have therapeutical outcome. But let's say if your environment is like focused on fun, and you're not allowed to experience anything out of fun, you're not allowed to share any difficult emotions, so maybe it won't necessarily be beneficial and might be actually more kind of closing and more difficult. So I think it's a... What's that?
So we'll have to
Yeah,
test
sure.
So, because how they compare to the psychedelic at a festival, compare that to
Yeah, but I do still... Yeah, but it's really hard to do the comparison. But I think maybe within the festival to compare people who experience it with friends that understand this emotional openness compared to people who are oriented for fun, because a lot of the recreational use is improving well-being of people. So it's not all like fun. So maybe within this kind of festival, have two groups, and I think that would be an interesting thing to look at.
Would you suggest that the guys should have experience with psychedelics themselves?
Yeah.
Or is that important or not important to guide them?
I think it is. I mean, at least if there are two guys, at least one in the room, I think, should be confident in his own psychedelic experience. And I believe it's important. I believe that when you experience those extremes, you'll know more how to be unjudgmental and just support this experience. Yeah. Yeah. Or how to deal with it. Sometimes you need like just a touch, or like holding of hands could be very beneficial during the experience, during the session, and when to do that, when to interfere, something maybe on your personal kind of experience.
So exactly being done people of antidepressants, did they go back on antidepressants?
Yeah,
after
some a month after.
See what they
Yeah,
found?
there's a certain time point that they go. Some of them go back. I don't really have the numbers, but maybe a month after. But a few weeks after, they don't go. I don't really know the accurate time point, and it's a good question.
Is that among the remitters or non-remitters?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think a lot of the remitters did not go back to antidepressants. This is
Has anyone been through the therapy on placebo?
no. But the future, we're going to start a new study probably in April, and
This
there's
is
going
just
to
a
be.
feasibility study, so to say you can do this.
But even the placebo is problematic. All of them will know, So it's a placebo effect of the experience. If somebody tells you, and this is, you cannot differentiate. If somebody tells you that a spiritual experience or like meeting, looking at geometrical patterns relates to clinical outcome. So one drug gives you a certain experience and the other drug doesn't.
Yeah.
You know exactly when you get the placebo.
I was just wondering if sitting in a comfy room with two people, being
It
open
might,
to emotions, listening to music might be therapeutic in itself.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We
We
were thinking of,
about things psychedelic.
yeah, we were thinking of like, we were thinking of acting. Yeah, exactly. That we're gonna do not in the depression, but we're gonna do a trial with healthy volunteers, and we're gonna have an active placebo for them. Not MDMA. I think MDMA can probably can also just there's a lot of MDMA study for PTSD, so and that's quite developed and been shown to help. So actually, MDMA in an environment like this can be very very psychedelic, especially if you like your intention is let's say a trauma. You're very much open to experiencing something related to that.
One of the recent map studies showed that very small amounts of MDMA in the therapeutic process were doing like a graded response, anti-therapeutic, because it was sort of stimulating but not enough to put them in that optimum arousal zone.
And also the very high doses, like there's a medium dose in the MAP study. So the very high doses, they're too much out there and they don't really experience anything autobiographical or related to the trauma. And then I think the 80 milligrams is a dose. So 120 is too high and 80 is probably the right dose for these purposes. And on the low dose, you create a certain resistance to the experience. And also a lot of studies with like underground kind of therapists, they say that a low dose, sometimes if a person is resistant, you just need to increase the dose. And like kind of like he can like, okay, let go because it's just too strong. But low doses, sometimes there's a lot of resistance with low doses. Yeah.
Niggly question as well. The graph where you've got the kids, well, they always say depression scale. Can you see how the depth on the first?
The BDI, yeah. The first,
well,
we had different scores. I looked at the BDI because it's mainly looked at the antidepressants literature. So that's the reason I used the BDI for the analysis of the amygdala. Here the quiz we took more frequently. We took 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4. We took more frequently. I'm not really sure.
The second issue is the back is self-rotating, and one of the concerns about a trial like this is very subjective of self-certification.
Yeah.
Using like the Hamilton depression score, which is from a clinician give you more confidence that it's got an antidepressant.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I will look also at the Hamilton. But yeah, we have scores of the Hamilton. I just didn't look at the.
Objective and subjective showed a correlation, but I can't remember the exercise.
Yeah. So the clinical outcome in the Hamilton is still a strong decrease, but we did not look at relationship between this and different stuff. Ross, she did interviews of her patients 6 months after the experience, and this was a very long and open kind of interviews. And there are 3 main kind of motifs that she saw. And one is that a lot of the patients are talking about that before the therapy they were avoidance. They behaved with a lot of avoidance to emotions, to their environment, and they moved from avoidance to acceptance. And the same from between disconnection to reconnection, so reconnection with the emotions and with your social environment. And a lot of the subjects claim that compared to the psilocybin assisted therapy, the previous treatments that they had just reinforced these types of behavior as avoidance and disconnection. And the actual change that they had with the psilocybin relates to this more acceptance and reconnection, and this kind of like a very subjective way to look at what I also discussed before about this increased emotional openness from the psilocybin assisted therapy. Now,
Can I ask you a question?
yeah.
I've got the paper here. They used the HAM-D and the MADRS, and the Hedges G, which is the effect size, was 2.4 and 2.7 at 1 week, and then versus it was 3.1 for the quiz, so it's slightly reduced from the measurement, but it's still quite good.
I'm just gonna close with descriptions of one of our patients from the acute experience, and this is taken from his blog. It's online. This relates to the idea of confronting and working through emotions. I also see my dad abusing me again, something that has flashed into my head now and again ever since it happened. But once again, rather than pushing the image to one side and avoiding the situation, I look him in the eyes and move through the discomfort and fear, in and through, in and through. With my demons fully revealed and presented to me, having looked my deepest fears directly in the eye, I enter a state where I feel completely elated, at peace, absolutely euphoric, the most relaxed and content I've ever been. Yeah, and that's it. So I'd like to thank the Imperial College team, David, Nott, and Robin for supervising me, Mendel and Ross for doing some of the analysis they showed, and James for being the guide in the study, Amanda for funding the study, the Bleckley Foundation, the MRC for funding the depression trial, Wallacea, which is a crowdfunding campaign to fund the LSD trial, Marty to rhythmotopic analysis, and Suresh for the MEG analysis, and Kevin for the cerebral blood flow analysis. Yeah.
Significance of those amygdala findings are?
I think the clinical significance is so a lot of the studies right now of these types of psychedelic therapy, they talk about like the mystical experience as the important benefit of like this is the main thing that will change the clinical outcome. So there's a lot of focus on the mystical experience. I think based on this results and based on Mendel's results and Ross, maybe we should have a certain shift to putting a lot of focus on emotional openness and think how to increase this openness during the acute experience, and this is the amygdala changes support this. So although this is quite common and this is the first thing you say to the patients is the idea of letting go and accepting whatever comes, we should look at actual ways of how to quantify it and how to improve it. So the amygdala relates to that.
Processes of generating openness.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you standardize an ayahuasca study? Because, I mean, ayahuasca is the umbrella term for soup which contains DMT and MAO inhibitor and a lot of other herbs.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it must vary depending on where they grow, what species they are, and what time of year you harvest. So how do you get a non-noisy study from that?
On what?
How do you reduce noise in that study when you give people ayahuasca? How do you see to it?
Just a limitation. You're right. There are lots of ayahuascas. I mean, in the studies that I showed regarding ayahuasca, some of them freeze dry and put it into pills. But it's from one batch with certain herbs, and maybe it's just the DMT and the MAO inhibitor. But other groups, some of the UDV, they add maybe 60 more components into it.
It's used to have angel content. That's quite different.
Yeah.
I think Jordi Reba has standardized extracts of ayahuasca that contain a certain amount of the very oxidative
Yeah.
as far as I know, I've got no large amounts of it. But I suppose that would be the way.
The same problems there with cannabis. Those would go around 140 cannabinoids and 650 other compounds. So you kind of make the assumption that it's THC doing most of the stuff. Yeah, I should know. I did my bachelor thesis on cannabis psychosis. Yeah. So, I mean, you can do what some guys here and myself have done, is do intravenous THC because you know that that's the only thing. So that the equivalent would be giving you DMT plus these MAO inhibitors in a pure form.
So pharmahuasca study.
Sorry?
It's called pharmahuasca.
Pharmahuasca.
Yeah. So yeah, just the combination of like the
Yeah.
amount.
And then you kind of make the assumptions that the other compounds are either such a low quantity or pharmacologically not as relevant.
Yeah.
But
Which
they might,
they're not
they
when
might
you
be.
use impure DC, mind you.
Sorry?
Which they're not when
Yeah.
you use impure DC, mind you, because there's CBD in there as well.
So, sorry, in cannabis.
Yeah. When you
Yeah.
use pure TC studies, I mean,
There's
I clarified quite a lot in my thesis because CBD has so much anti-psychotic properties, but it's not common.
oh, sorry.
Yes.
What's the next big trial then? What's going to be after this?
We're doing a DMT study, imaging, with healthy volunteers, which would be EEG and fMRI combined. We're doing a continuation of the depression trial, but with placebo also.
The same trial continuing technically.
It's a different trial. So right now it's going to be a randomized control trial with a placebo arm, with a psilocybin and ketanserin arm, so blocking the 2A agonism, so an antagonist to the 2A receptor, and with an SSRI arm. So this is the continuation of the depression trial, and we're going to do another healthy volunteers, but naives. So naive trial and with an active placebo also. So for the healthy volunteers.
I suppose LSD neuroimaging bits, do they wear eye masks?
No.
Can you do that? Would you use the whole accidentally opening your eyes?
Yeah, you can, but I think in the fMRI scanner, I would prefer them not to also have the eye mask. Yeah, it's already so claustrophobic. So
That's also an issue when you're either opposed to still sunlight.
yeah, I mean, there's an issue of opening the eyes. Yeah, of course. Yeah, the eye mask, what it does also, it can help just like keep them down, which is a good thing. But I'm not sure it's the right thing to do in this scanner. So we're using an eye mask for the DMT study for the pilot. So it's going to be just with EEG, and we're using an eye mask. But we'll have to decide if we want to use it for the EEG and fMRI combined.
Well, thank you very much, Leor.
Thank you.
Fantastic.